This day in sports history. It's May 8th, and with the PGA Championship coming up next week at Quail Hollow in Charlotte, let's go back to what happened on this day in 2005 when Sergio Garcia had a day he'd like to forget at Quail Hollow. This was the Wachovia Championship in its third year as part of the PGA Tour schedule. Quail Hollow had been an immediate hit with tour players, and it drew the world's best from the start. In this edition, Sergio Garcia played a superb first 3 days, building a 6-shot lead heading into the final round. But in a harbinger of things to come that day, Sergio missed a 2-foot par putt on the opening hole. His putter failed him again as he missed 3 more makeable putts on the front 9. And the thing is, it wasn't completely out of character for Sergio in 05. He was one of the worst putters on the tour, statistically at the bottom in putts per round and putts after hitting greens in regulation. On a day when other guys were finding opportunities for birdies, Garcia was struggling to make par. His game continued to leak oil, and by the time he made the turn for home, he was still clinging to a slim lead, but his driver started to spray shots all over the place. He missed a 6-foot putt on 15, and then when he put his tee shot in the water at the par 3 17th, he was in a tie with Vijay Singh and Jim Furyk. He ended up shooting a final round even par 72, but with both Singh and Furyk carding 66s, it was now a 3-way tie and a playoff instead of the expected Sunday stroll for Sergio. Garcia was eliminated on the first hole of the sudden death playoff when he 3-putted from 45 feet, once again missing a 6-footer that would have kept hope alive. Singh and Furyk battled for another 3 holes before Furyk yanked his tee shot left into the creek on 18, took a drop, and then banged his 4th off the pin that redirected his shot to greenside rough. Singh rolled in his winning putt to win the playoff and the big check. Now, while not as dramatic as Greg Norman's collapse during the '96 Masters, Sergio became the 5th player to cough up a 6-shot final day lead to lose a PGA tournament, and the first since Norman did it 9 years before. This episode is brought to you by the Sterling Soap Company. Sterling Soap is 100% natural, and with a variety of bath soaps, shave soaps, beard balm, lotions, cologne, and many more personal care products in a large variety of scents, you're sure to find something that's perfect for you or that special someone in your life. Check them out at sterlingsoap.com. On this day in 1970, it was Willis Reed making his dramatic entrance prior to Game 7 of the NBA Finals. The New York Knicks and the Los Angeles Lakers were tied at 3 games apiece with the decisive game in New York at Madison Square Garden. Reed was the league MVP in 1970, averaging 22 points and 14 rebounds a game during the regular season. At 6 feet 10 inches tall, he was the man in the middle, and in this championship series, the man responsible for handling 7'2" Wilt Chamberlain on the defensive end. But Willis had torn his thigh muscle in Game 5, and he had missed Game 6 because of it. With Reed not in the lineup, Wilt poured in 45 points, grabbed 27 rebounds, and a 22-point blowout win for the Lakers. The headline in all the New York papers prior to the game read something to the effect, "Reed not likely to play tonight." And if Willis Reed couldn't play, well, a similar outcome was predicted for Game 7. As both teams were warming up a few minutes prior to the tip-off, Reed was in the Knicks locker room getting pumped full of cortisone in an effort to dull the pain. He made the decision to, in essence, play on one leg against the greatest scorer in the NBA at the time because, as he said, "I didn't want to have to look at myself in the mirror 20 years later and say, I wish I had tried to play." A rumor started to circulate around press row that maybe, possibly, Reed was going to play. Marv Albert was calling the game on radio for the Knicks, and he had already received word that Willis was dressed out and ready to go, so he wasn't as surprised as the Madison Square Garden crowd when he announced it.
Here comes Willis Reed. Reed making his way from the dressing room area out of the court, and Willis is receiving a standing ovation. Takes the ball to the foul line. He jumps, and it hits the rim and bounces to the right, and now Willis will take part of the pregame warm-up.
So there was Willis Reed, walking out of the tunnel, stepping onto the floor in uniform, ready to play. On the other end, the Lakers were a bit stunned. They all stopped shooting, and they turned to see Reed walking towards the Knicks basket, picking up a ball, taking a couple of shots. Walt Frazier remembers seeing the stunned looks on Lakers players' faces.
I saw the whole Laker team standing around staring at this man. They stopped warming up. They stopped doing what they were doing to look and see how Willis was.
Now, what got the crowd and his teammates going even more were the 2 baskets he knocked down in the opening minutes.
Rebounded by Bradley. New York ball down court to Frazier. Got it by West. Left side of the lane. Outside Reed. Jumps from 20. Yes! So the first test of the night with Chamberlain going against Reed does not pay off for the Lakers. Chamberlain did not get good position. Barnett to Reed on the forecourt. Right side from 20. Jump. Yes! Willis has hit on his first 2. 5-2. The Knicks on top. A minute and a half gone by, and this crowd is going wild right at the outset.
Those would be the only points he would score in the game, but the boost those 4 points and the defense he played on Chamberlain was astronomical. And while this will always be called the Willis Reed game, what gets overshadowed a lot is the game that Walt Frazier had that night. Frazier had 36 points and handed out 17 assists. He was a perfect 12 for 12 from the free throw line. Dick Barnett had 21, Dave DeBusschere had 18 points, 17 rebounds. Reed played 27 minutes that night, mostly in the first half, and he was mobile enough to cause Wilt problems. Chamberlain scored 21 and pulled 24 boards, but it wasn't nearly enough. The Knicks built an early double-digit lead and held it all the way to the end of the game, winning 113-99. It was the Knicks' first NBA championship in their 24-year history. On this day in 1968, Catfish Hunter threw a perfect game for the Oakland Athletics against the Minnesota Twins, which featured some pretty good hitters like Harmon Killebrew, Rod Carew, and Tony Oliva. Hunter was a 22-year-old pitching for a team that had just relocated to the West Coast after spending 12 years in Kansas City. Hunter faced 27 Twins and sat them all down. He struck out 11, but he did live in the danger zone a little bit in this game. He went to full counts on 6 hitters, and in the second ran the count to 3-0 on Oliva before coming back with 3 straight strikes. Only 5 balls were hit hard enough to make it out of the infield, and those were all corralled by the A's outfielders. It was the first perfect game in the majors since Sandy Koufax threw one in 1965, and the first by an American League pitcher since Don Larsen's perfect game in the 1956 World Series, and the first one in the regular season in the American League in 46 years. On this day in 2016, it was a statistical oddity when Washington Nationals slugger Bryce Harper tied a major league record for walking 6 times in a game. He was also hit by a pitch, which also does not count as an official at-bat, so he may have stepped to the plate 7 times against the Chicago Cubs on this day, but he officially had 0 at-bats. According to ESPN stats, it was the first time in at least the previous century that a player had reached base 7 times without recording a plate appearance. Harper had led the league in on-base percentage and slugging the previous season, so it's understandable why Chicago wanted to pitch around him. But the Cubs' skittishness to pitch to Harper actually paid off. Chicago won 4-3 in 13 innings. In the 4-game series with the Nationals that this game was a part of, the Cubs walked Harper a total of 13 times, also a record for walks by one player in a single series. And you probably know the horse War Admiral from the Seabiscuit movie about their famous match race in November 1938. Well, on this day in 1937, War Admiral won the Kentucky Derby by 2 lengths over the closest contender. War Admiral was early in his racing career, but this was his 3rd win in 3 races. His reputation would obviously get bigger over the next year, winning the Triple Crown in 1937, and then 8 more races in 38 before his meeting with Seabiscuit at Pimlico. And time now for today's That's Got Nothing to Do with Sports Fun Fact. Amelia Earhart created her own line of clothing. She launched it in 1933 and was the first female celebrity to create a line of clothing using her notoriety to market them. It was called, appropriately enough, Amelia Fashions, and was said to be clothing for the female aviator and the woman who lives actively, since everything at the time for aviation was designed for men. The aviator's fashion line included anti-wrinkle items such as gasp, pants, and dresses, and could be worn by the active lady on land or in the air. Amelia used the fashion line as a way to finance her adventures. This has been an original Thrive Suite production.